Hey guys, it's Kether, my review for the final season of You're the Worst. So what this season is essentially about is, of course, as we know, at the end of season 4, Jimmy and Gretchen have gone back together, but they also have gotten re-engaged, and most of the season is them trying to plan their wedding, but also attempt to maintain a conventional relationship as best as they can. However, as the season goes on, many past demons of the characters start to resurface, and the likelihood of these two getting married becomes a lot more doubtful, and that's really all I'm going to say. And going into this season, I was very skeptical because on one hand, I adore this show. I think this is such a fantastic series. I think this has been one of the best romantic comedy shows out there because it has subverted so many expectations and things like that. I mean, the stuff they did in seasons 1 and 2, 1 through 3 in particular, are extraordinary, but especially when it comes to seasons 1 and 2. That's when I think the show was at its strong suit. On the other hand, though, the previous season wasn't really very good. They tried to do something different, and in turn, it negatively affected the show. So, knowing that, I was a little bit worried with this season, but knowing that they were also wrapping things up, I was really hoping that it could, give that show that focus that it's needed, really remind them of what the show's supposed to be, and I am so happy to say this, but this delivered so much more than I expected. This is such a fantastic season and an amazing way to go out. Easily, I think, one of their best seasons yet. And I can officially say that this is one of the best shows on TV, and it definitely reminded me of why I think that. But we're just getting to right now, starting off with the cast. And look, I've praised these guys many times before, but this season especially, I mean, every single one of these cast members are absolutely extraordinary. All of them are working to their fullest ability. Chris Geere and Aya Cash, though, those two are the stars of the show. And I mean, they should be. The show is about them, and the focus is definitely on them, and we really do get to see, again, them work to their fullest potential in terms of acting. Chris Geere, I thought, was fantastic here as Jimmy. Their chemistry, as always, is great, but especially when it comes to Aya Cash, who, holy shit, man, Aya Cash, I mean, I've praised her before. The fact that she doesn't have some sort of accolade for the work she's done as Gretchen Cutler, I think is disgraceful. There are multiple sequences in this season alone that are Emmy-worthy, that show why she does deserve some sort of award for this, why she should be lauded with something. And the fact that her work has gone kind of unrecognized is very sad to see, but she just kills it in this season. And I'm not saying that she did in the other seasons, but this season in particular, it reminded me why I did adore her so much as an actress. And look, there's been a lot of great talent, with this show, but Aya Cash is definitely the one I'm going to keep my eye out for because I think she is absolutely a star, and this season very much reminded me of why. The rest of the cast, though, as well, also does some great work. Desmin Borges, I think, does his best work this season. I was so impressed by him, especially in the penultimate episode this season. Holy shit, I mean, I have never seen this kind. I mean, I've seen this range from him before, obviously, because of, like, the episode that focused on him in season 3, but this is probably some of Edgar's best work yet. I love what he did here. And then Kether Donohue as Lindsay. Out of all the characters this season, she probably is the most stable. She's the one that feels like she has her shit together. And I mean, that's because season 4, she really did clean things up, as we know. So this season, there's not as much going on with her thematically, but she still does do some excellent work. She is absolutely hysterical in this show, but she also does a great job at tugging at your heartstrings, and that's something that I can say about this entire cast is that while they are really funny, they always do take their roles seriously. They always do know how to give these roles a bit more realism than really is required, and I think they do a very good job with that. And I want to reiterate how great the chemistry is with these 4 characters. I think they all just do such a great job. We really do see that this season. Like I said, all of them really do work to their fullest ability, and Again, I know I keep repeating myself a lot, but when you don't, it really does show how integral their bonding really is, how much you need these four characters to be together, and thankfully they definitely excel at that this season. Even the actors that play Becca, Vernon, and Paul, all of them are fantastic this season too. I really did love everyone this season. I think everyone really did do an incredible job, and there really isn't a single performance that I can say, oh, they weren't on their A game, oh, they weren't great. Everyone was fantastic here, and I just can't praise this cast enough. But who I really have to give credence to for this entire season is, of course, Stephen Falk, who I have pretty much adored all of his directing throughout the show. Not so much Season 4, though. However, I can respect where he's coming from with Season 4. You know, he was trying to do something different. He was trying to keep the show fresh. But I think knowing that the show had a final season, he really did pull all the stops to make this as memorable as one as possible, because I think he was just reminded of the core dynamic of the show. And this season reminds us of the things that we really do need, which I will get into. But in terms of tone, I mean, this is the best the show's ever been. The show is the funniest it's ever been, but it also is the most dramatic it's ever been. There is one episode in particular in terms of comedy with Jimmy that I think is an all-timer. In terms of humor, I mean, I've not laughed that hard at a You're the Worst episode in quite some time, and I adored everything about it. But also when it comes to its dramatic weight, I mean, that's something the show has always done so well. It's blended in the comedy, but it's also done just as you know, it's done just as masterful of a job when it comes to dramatic moments. And both of those two elements, they intertwine very well here. They never really feel like they are at the expense of one another, and I think they do a very good job with that. And that's something that Season 4 also had a hard time with. It focused way too much on mean-spirited humor. And again, knowing this is the final season, I think he really was reminded of what this show was supposed to be, and I think he did such an excellent job with that. But the writing is what I really want to talk about here, because there is so much I love about this season. Look, like I said, the thing that Season 4 showed us is that this show, it's not the same without the core dynamics. And thankfully this season, we get all of them back. I mean, Jimmy and Gretchen, you need those two together. The show does not work unless those two are together. The show is supposed to be focusing on the functionality of these two, the differences that they have. You know, are their differences too drastic from one another? Is it going to hurt one another? Or can they prevail? Can they actually move past it and try to be a normal couple? And the way this season explores that, it really does explore new ground with that idea. Sure, a lot of this show has been that, but this season, Jimmy and Gretchen are more motivated than ever to try to make this work. They are doing whatever they can to have as normal of a relationship as possible, and I think he did a very good job with that. But of course, there are obstacles that are in the way. Jimmy's always going to have a very cynical, very self-righteous attitude. That hasn't changed, but he has attempted to put that on the back burner. He cares more for Gretchen this season than he ever has, and I think that's something he tapped into very well. Gretchen's clinical depression, that's tapped into a lot more than it ever has, I think, since Season 2, pretty much. And that's something I also love seeing. I love seeing more of Gretchen's struggle, because it's not really something she ever got over. Sure, she was doing therapy, but she never fully got over it. And this season really does re-explore that theme of, you know, can Gretchen get over this? Is she ever going to move past it? Is this going to be a potential problem for her and Jimmy? Is it something that can make their relationship, can they make their relationship survive, you know, without letting this get in the way? And I think that's a very interesting thing to explore here, and I think they did a very good job with that. But aside from Jimmy and Gretchen, we also have two other core dynamics of the show that are very important. Edgar and Jimmy are a huge component of this show, and I've said that so many times. I think they are as important as Gretchen and Jimmy. Edgar really is the thing that is Jimmy's moral compass. He's the one who really does get Jimmy to think a little bit more rationally about things, and this season more than ever. And again, since Edgar is not just the person who is just relying on Jimmy for things, and he's not just just walking all over him. He feels a lot more independent. He feels a lot more like his own character, and I really love the stuff they did with that friendship in particular. It was great to see those two back on good terms, because again, in season 4, it just hurt the show. You need those two to be you need those two to be as close as possible. You need those two to be a core dynamic of your season, or else it just kind of falls apart. And same when it comes to Lindsay and Gretchen. That's another big part of the season. We get to see those two interact, and I think they do a very good job with that overall. The chemistry between these four, it's always been such an important part of the show. But like I said, the thing I love the most about this season is that it wasn't afraid to get really raw and emotional. And it's emotional in a way we haven't really seen the show since, I would say, the beginning of season 3. Season 3 was not necessarily up and down for me. I do think it's still a great season, but there were even points in that season where it felt like they were a little too focused on comedy. And this season, they really did tap back into those raw things, like Gretchen's relationship with her mother and things like that. And again, her clinical depression, all of that stuff is tapped back into beautifully, and I think they do such a great job with that. But the other thing they did very well this season is what to do with the supporting cast, because obviously Becca, Vernon, and Paul, they're always going to be a part of this show. You want them to be there, and thankfully they strip away a lot of the things that just made them highly unlikable. Becca is still critical. I mean, she's always going to be. That's just the kind of person that she is. However, she is not nearly as annoying as she was in season 4. She's not, she's not trying to destroy Lindsay's life. She is not kicking Lindsay while she's down, and I did like seeing that here. There is actually a subplot this season with Becca, Vernon, and Paul, and I was surprised with how well they handled it. At first, I thought it was going to feel very tacked on, like, oh, we just need something to do with these characters, but considering where the show ends up going with them, it actually makes a lot of sense, and I liked where they went with them as characters. I thought it made a lot of sense. Paul especially, I liked a lot more this season. All the men's right activist stuff, thankfully, that's gone, and thank God, because it was not working. It was making him a very unlikable character. This season, he is back to just being that nerdy, naive Paul, who's a little bit more aware of what's going on. He's not going to let people walk all over him, but he does feel a lot more sympathetic. You can understand where Paul's coming from this season. I think they did a good job with that. Again, you need that character to feel, like likable. You need to feel for that character. You can't make him this men's right activist. It just doesn't really work, and I'm glad they did strip that part of the show away, because like I said, that was not working overall. Those three are as good as they've ever been, and I really did love that for sure. But something else I've always loved about the show is what it really has to say about relationships. I mean, this has always been the anti-romantic comedy, the one that it does things that other romantic comedies just simply won't do, and this season is a very good example of that. The season explores a lot of questions about, commitment and about marriage and about even mental illness and things like that. The idea of abandonment, the idea of just can a relationship survive and things like that. And I think all of those themes were very well tapped into here. It never really felt like the show was getting too overly preachy. And again, that's always been something the show has done so well. And that's, again, one of the reasons I was so critical when it comes to season 4, because of the fact that I know what the show is capable of. And things like what we got this season, one episode in particular, involving Jimmy and Gretchen and these couple friends they're trying to make, that is the show. That is the You're the Worst that I fell in love with, and I am so happy that they got back to those deeper complexities that I always think have been one of the best things about the show, for sure. Now, of course, in terms of cinematography, this show has always been great at that. There are a lot of fantastic shots this season. There's a lot that I really do love. Episode 1 in particular is rapidly different than anything we've seen with the show, and it was a very risky way to start out the season, but it makes a lot of sense what they're trying to do, and I think they did a very good job with that. There's a lot of really amazing shots. One in the finale that honestly blew me away. I loved what they ended up doing, this point of view shot that was going going on, I thought was incredible, and I absolutely love that. Really great camera work all around, just really great stuff going on there. The score is another great part of the show. The show has always done a great job with the soundtrack and things like that, and I think they definitely again, that was definitely something that were on their A game with this season. And the editing, this season was 13 episodes, and honestly, it really did fly by for me. I wouldn't have been upset if there were more. I think that they told as much story as they needed to. It never really felt like there was anything that was, weighing down the show in terms of episode length. It felt like every single episode got us to a specific place, and I think they did a very good job with that overall. So again, with so much praise about the season, is there anything weighing it down? Well, honestly, there's not really a lot. It is hard to get angry at this season because it is so great. It does feel like such a return to form for the show. There is, however, one thing that I do think brings this season down slightly, and that's the character of Lindsay, who, again, I love. I love Lindsay as a character. I think she's so hilarious and fun. I love where she's gone from seasons 1 to 4, where she's, learned to be a lot more selfless and things like that, and she cares a lot more about certain relationships in her life. However, because of the fact that she is so together and she is on top of things, she's the only character this season that doesn't really feel like she has a specific arc that she's going through. And it's not necessarily a huge problem. My problem is that in the last few episodes of this season, they really try to kickstart something for her. They really try to get her to a specific point. And it's not that it didn't work, because ultimately it did end up working. I just felt that it was a little bit rushed. And I think if it was peppered throughout the season, it would have worked just a little bit better for me. But other than that, this is a near perfect season overall. And there really isn't too much that holds it back for me. With all that said, though, I have to dive into spoilers because there's so much to talk about with this season. I really do want to just jump right into it. So if you haven't seen Season 5, do not watch the rest of the review. Trust me, if you didn't like Season 4 and you don't want to watch Season 5, honestly, get back into it. I think it's the show that you want it to be. It renews its focus on the characters that you want. It is much more of that, dramedy that we all want it to be, and I think they do a very good job with it overall, but I'm just going to get right into it. So I think the first thing to really talk about here is, of course, the flash forwards, which I didn't bring up. I did not bring it up in the review because it's not something the season starts out with. It starts off, and you think that, oh, things are going to go off for Jimmy and Gretchen without a hitch. But then you realize that, there might be something much darker at play. And I love the way that Falk planted the seeds here. I mean, there are all these red herrings throughout this season of things that could potentially hurt them. I mean, obviously, Gretchen's clinical depression is a big one. But also the lack of planning that Gretchen does throughout the wedding. I mean, Jimmy seems to be the one that cares, while to Gretchen, it feels more like an afterthought. It doesn't really seem like something she's all that invested in, while Jimmy is so invested in it. I mean, it's all he wants to do. It's all he wants to talk about. He feels so terrible after certain things that he does, and Gretchen just doesn't seem to care all that much. She's very calm throughout a lot of this season, and it's something that you do think could potentially hurt them. So that's something at play. Also, the fact that, Jimmy, he's always going to have that, like I said, self-righteous attitude to him. So that something could end up happening there. And I do really like the way he planted that with the flash forward. I think that was a really cool idea. Seeing Gretchen miserable, seeing like the beaten up car and things like that. All of that was really great. And all of that really was hinging on these two getting together and seeing if their wedding actually does end up happening. And for a while, it was pretty obvious that it wasn't going to happen. I mean, especially when it comes to the conversation with Edgar. I mean, that really was that final nail in the coffin. I mean, sure, there were definitely things throughout the season, especially, like I said, Gretchen's depression getting worse and worse as it goes on. And mainly because she's taking those pills from Edgar, and, they're not pills that are prescribed her. These are just pills that she's taking, clearly because I guess it makes her feel better, but it makes her too happy. It's not a natural happiness, and I thought that was a really great idea. I mean, one of my favorite parts of season 2 was Gretchen's sort of hiding how she was actually feeling, and her trying to avoid her depression and things like that, and her finally coming to terms with it, and realizing this season that she isn't ever going to come to terms with it is a very realistic angle to take, because when you have clinical depression like that, it doesn't just go away. It's always going to be a part of you. You just need to try to not let it win. And you see Gretchen is not really caring about that these days. There's not a lot that she seems to care about. And that moment where she's talking to Edgar, and you can tell that she isn't feeling herself. She hates herself, if anything, and she doesn't understand why Jimmy loves her as much as he does, is a heartbreaking moment, and that definitely had me near tears. And that moment alone, I think, should give Aya Cash the Emmy. But the moment where she's talking to her mom, especially, who, honestly, I was not a fan of her mom at all in season 4. I thought they just made her completely unlikable. And this season, sure, she's not a good person, but you can understand in a sense where she's coming from. Gretchen's mom is pretty much everything Gretchen is afraid of becoming. She has convinced herself that anyone caring for you or giving you any sort of sympathy and trying to make things better for you, that's a bad thing. You cannot let them do that. You can't let them try to move past your illness. You can't let them, just try to embrace your flaws. You have to, you just can't let them do that. You yourself have to try to push away from that. And you see where that's gotten Gretchen's mom. And I think they did a very good job with that. But the scene that I love the most between those two is when Gretchen is telling her mom that she knew that she had this depression, but she just chose to do nothing about it. She laughed it off, if anything. She made it seem like it wasn't a big deal. And that's why things got worse and worse for Gretchen. That's why she started cutting herself and things like that. And that was such an emotional scene. But again, it shows that Gretchen, she's finally starting to realize that this self-hatred was not necessarily driven by her. It was that her mom was sort of enabling her to do so. And knowing that her mom was doing that, I mean, it makes her character that much more fucked up. But again, because the fact this season did a lot of great work with that relationship, you can understand why her mom would have that attitude, because for her, I mean, it's clearly gotten worse for her, and she is almost just as damaged as Gretchen, and we definitely did see that here for sure, and I think that was something that they definitely did handle very well. But that moment between those two was just such a powerful moment. It felt so raw, and I think it was definitely one of the biggest moments for Gretchen this season. I love what we got there for sure. But then, of course, it comes down to the conversation that Jimmy has with Edgar. This was something that I feel like was always a long time coming. Edgar's always kind of felt like the third wheel, where Gretchen has tolerated him. He's been there, and he's always seen the symptoms in Gretchen, but because he cares about Jimmy so much, he tries to move past it. He tries to believe that, maybe things can work out between Jimmy and Gretchen. So when they finally have that last great day together as best friends before Jimmy is about to get married, that's when he lets it slip. And that whole moment, look, I've heard a lot of people say, oh, Edgar's just being an asshole. He was the one who pushed for this wedding. But let me ask you this. If you had a best friend and your best friend was someone who you were so devoted to and you counted on, and you were even someone like Jimmy who didn't think that you wanted him as your friend, but over time you really did grow to love him as a best friend, and you understand the importance of him and things like that, and you know that he really does care about you, maybe even more than you care about him, and he's always seen you with this girl, and he sees how much you two love each other, but in the back of his mind, he knows that there's something a little bit off about her. He knows that there's just something that is, hurting their relationship. And especially when it comes to Gretchen, who, like I said, was deliberately taking pills that were not prescribed to her, which were giving her all sorts of mood swings and things like that. We saw how much it was fucking her up for sure. it's understandable why Edgar finally lets this slip, why he isn't just going to hide it anymore, because he is scared. He's scared of what's going to happen to Jimmy and Gretchen. So I didn't see it as an asshole move at all. I saw it as Edgar finally realizing that, hey, I can only be so supportive for so long. You know, I've seen the cracks in the foundation, and I want to try to do something about it before it gets worse and it completely falls apart, because he's seen it fall apart before, and he doesn't want that to happen again. And he knows when he's talking to Jimmy about the problems with him and Gretchen and that those two are going to destroy each other, he knows that he may just retroactively destroy his relationship with Jimmy. But it's a really powerful moment. And again, it makes sense for Edgar, someone who, again, I think really is the most rational character on this show, the person who really does have is the most level-headed out of everyone. It does make sense where he's coming from, and again, just Chris Geere and Desmin Borges, they acted the hell out of that scene. I love the way things do go there. That being said, though, it was absolutely devastating for Jimmy and Edgar, because those two were just finally the best they've ever been. I mean, Jimmy was finally accepting Edgar as a friend. He was telling him, "Look, I've never appreciated you," and it was just such a great moment. So to see it almost get destroyed like that was devastating to watch. But of course, then we get to the finale, and I'll just say it right now, this finale to me was perfect. I really couldn't have asked for anything better when it comes to this finale. I think they handled everything so well here. I love the way things played out, but the thing I loved most about this finale is how much of a misdirect it really is. I mean, the finale starts off, and you know things are not going to go well for Jimmy and Gretchen. You know that there's a very good chance that these two do not end up married and do not end up together by the end of the show. And the way things play out here, it's not necessarily the way you might expect, especially when it comes to, how great everything's turning out. Jimmy and Gretchen seem really psyched about their wedding. They're really excited for it, but there is one minor setback, and of course that is Edgar and them trying to get him away. But of course, Edgar's not gonna go away because he cares about Jimmy, and he knows that, he still has those doubts. He still has that attitude that maybe this isn't gonna work out. Maybe Jimmy's gonna come to his senses, and you see that Jimmy is starting to question it. It definitely does have an impact on him. As dismissive as he seemed to be towards Edgar, you can tell that, yeah, what Edgar said, it makes sense to Jimmy, and it definitely is something that I think in the back of his mind was percolating for a while, and I think we definitely do see that come to fruition here. Especially the moment with Gretchen and Jimmy, when he realizes that she basically, farmed her own vows, and she had someone, write it out for her, and you can see how furious he is of it, but of course he did the same thing, so there's no reason for him to be furious of it, and what could have been a very destructive ending, instead is, I think, the moment where these two have understood each other the most, and to me, I think the best scene of this entire finale is when Jimmy is talking to Gretchen about the conventionality of marriage and the idea that, we say these vows to each other, and we say how relationships are going to last forever, and we say how we're going to be with each other till death do you part, but in reality, you don't actually mean it. That's just something that you have been, you've basically been told to say. It's something that we just do as conformity. But Gretchen and Jimmy, they have never been a part of conformity. They have never been someone that just, is susceptible to the idea of conformity. They always try to stray away from it. There's nothing conventional about the relationship, and we very much do see that here. So the moment where these two actually do decide to be together, but just not get married, is a great one. It shows that this was supposed to be a misdirect. And I don't think this was Stephen Falk necessarily trolling with us. I think it was him showing that there was doubt in their relationship, and they did not get married in the end, but they do in fact stay together, and I really did love where they ended up going with that. Of course, we do end up flashing forward. We realize that they have a daughter now and things like that, and they're going to try to make this work as much as they possibly can. Hell, they're even taking their baby girl to, like, the bar and things like that. We even see the return of Jimmy's, like, breathing apparatus, which is really funny to see. just stuff like that. It shows that, yes, these two, there's gonna be cracks in the foundation. I mean, as Gretchen says at the end, there could be one day where Gretchen just jumps in front of a train and just decides to just end it all. But Jimmy doesn't care at the moment. He wants to make this work. He wants them to do this on their own terms. He doesn't want to have to force anything. And I think that's a big part of what the fatal error of these two. I think the biggest problem is that they've tried to have a conventional relation for so long, and they're just now realizing that that's just not them. They're never going to have that conventional relationship. They love each other too much to do that, and I think we definitely do see that here, and I think Edgar's line where he talks about how, you know, you two love each other, but that doesn't mean that you are good for each other. I think this is how they're good for each other, is that they try to move past all the conventionalities and they just do their own thing and try to stay together as much as they possibly can. And I definitely really did love it. It was a beautiful end to the show. The moment with them eating the pancakes at the end is just fantastic. And I loved everything about it. I cannot praise this finale enough. The places it went, the way it explored, you know, marriage and things like that, all of that was just so interesting and so insightful, and it's something that only this show could pull off, and I love the way things turned out. You know, it was a happy ending, and that's something that definitely did surprise me for sure. But then, of course, there's the other stuff going on, which, again, the finale definitely did not have its shortage of subplots. I mean, really everyone got some closure here, more than I expected. Even Ben Folds got closure. That moment where he's, like, with Edgar and he's all drunk and things like that. I did not expect to see Ben Folds again, but that was great. I love seeing the Froyo guy. We even got to see a grown-up Killian, which was amazing to watch, but the stuff that I loved the most was with Lindsay and Paul, which, again, that was the thing that I did feel was a little bit rushed. The idea these two would come back together does actually make a lot of sense. I mean, these two are in a much better place now. Lindsay has learned to accept Paul for his flaws, and realizing that there really is nobody that she works better with than Paul. And look, I can understand if someone says, oh, why didn't we get to see these two try to reaffirm their relationship? And at first I felt the same way. I'm like, I don't know how this makes any sense. But if you really think about it, Paul always did care about Lindsay. It never was that he didn't care about her. It's that she didn't want to do anything for herself. As we remember, there was that realization in season 2 where she realized that she depended on him for literally everything. And sure, this is the man that she once did cuckold. This is the man that she did terrible things to in season 3, but the two have grown. They've moved past it, and they want to try again, just like Jimmy and Gretchen want to try again. So you can understand why these two are good for each other. Lindsay and Edgar aren't going to work out because it's just awkward between them. Those two work as friends. They don't work as a couple. But Lindsay and Paul, on the other hand, they have history. They know each other, and I think it makes sense for those two to come back together, and I really did love seeing that. Little things like seeing Becca in the flash forwards, and she is pregnant, but she's now drinking water, showing that she is starting to help herself. You know, maybe it's not going to stay, but at least it's effort, and she's trying. Vernon has now finally gotten his shit together. He's getting a job. It seems like he is doing much better than he ever has. I did, however, love, though, getting to see Vernon just freak out about being Jimmy's best man. We always know how bad Vernon is in terrible situations and things like that, and all that stuff was just great. I love the way that was done, and I really did love the moment there for sure. Even the stuff with Lindsay, like her singing that song about Gretchen. Again, the episode definitely did not have a shortage when it came to comedy, but the satisfaction for all the characters definitely did help. I mean, even with Edgar, I mean, the fact that he's listening to, like, that murder mystery podcast and then decides to become the director of a murder mystery podcast of his own is just genius. And stuff like that, that's why I love the show as much as I do, the connectivity there. And then seeing Jimmy and Edgar reconcile, that was also an amazing moment because, again, sure, what Edgar said, it was damaging at the time, but these two are able to move past it. Jimmy realized that Edgar did have a point. Edgar realized that, sure, what he said, it might be true, but the way he came off, it was very hateful. He didn't need to say it in the way that he did, and you can understand why there was a lot of resentment there for Jimmy. I think Jimmy does want to be friends with Edgar, but what he said did hurt him, and, you know, you can see how he's moved past it. And to see that all of the flash forwards, they weren't weren't Gretchen being afraid of seeing Jimmy, it was the fear of seeing Edgar again. And that conversation that Gretchen has with Edgar in the car, where she's telling him that, you know, the one redeemable quality that Jimmy had was letting you stay in his apartment and things like that, and that she's never really respected Edgar, I think that still does ring true. I don't think she's ever going to fully respect Edgar, but I do think that Edgar, you know, staying on his own, being by himself, that's what he needs. I think, you know, as much as Jimmy and Edgar, they are going to remain friends, I think it's made sense that Edgar has very much tried to find a life for himself. Again, it's a great step forward, especially back in seasons 1 and 2 when he was constantly relying on Jimmy. It really just shows how much he's evolved as a character, and that's something I just adored about this finale. There are so many moments that just show how much these characters have evolved, how much they've changed, how much they have gone from seasons 1 to 5, and I just loved the way things turned out there. Seeing things end with a wedding, the way things started, was also just showing how we have come full circle, and I really did love seeing that. And again, the thing I love the most about this finale is that things aren't all perfect. Sure, characters, they end things in a happy place, but that's for now. It doesn't mean that it's always going to turn out this way. Maybe things don't work out for Jimmy and Gretchen. Maybe Gretchen does end up killing herself in front of a train. Maybe Becca does go back to drinking alcohol. Maybe Lindsay and Paul, maybe their relationship doesn't work. But again, the idea that they're trying to do things to the best of their ability. They're not letting anything get in the way. They're not forcing these things to happen. That's what is showing the progress. That's really what is so satisfying about this, is that finally these characters are realizing what is in their best interest and what they really do need to help themselves. And sure, there are certain things like Gretchen's clinical depression that is just never going to fully wither away. I mean, that's always going to be a part of her, but she's trying to manage it as best as she can, and I really do love the way we ended things here. I really, honestly, can't think of anything that wasn't satisfying. I think this was honestly a perfect finale, and I just can't praise it enough here. So overall, this season is everything that I really want it to be. It reaffirms the show as a show about two damaged people who are trying to be together in spite of their many flaws and things like that. It reminds us of the key bonds that we need on the show. Of course, you know, Gretchen and Jimmy, Lindsay and Gretchen, and of course, you know, Edgar and Jimmy. We need those three pairings or the show just does not work as well. The four main cast members are the best they've ever been in the show. The show is as funny as it's ever been, but again, it taps into a lot of darker issues that the other seasons just haven't done as much, and I think that's one of the things this season benefited from the most. Gretchen's clinical depression is back in the forefront. Jimmy's sort of self-loathing, but also his doubtful sort of attitude, that's back in the forefront. I mean, just everything about this season, it reminded me why I adore this show as much as I do. Again, I've always maintained that this is one of the best shows on TV. That's always been a part of my mentality, but this season reminded me of why. It really did reignite my love that I have for the show. It honestly, as much as I did love this final season, as much as I don't want to see this show go, I think they did need this final season. I mean, they were going off the rails for a while. They were starting to forget what made the show so great, and I think them getting this final season, it reminded Stephen Falk and everyone else involved what makes this show so great, what this show needs to succeed, why this show has gotten the love that it has. I mean, sure, it hasn't been the biggest fan base. Hell, there aren't really many people that talk about the show, unfortunately. But for those that do, I think he was reminded of why people love this show as much as they do, and thank God for that, because this was really everything that I could have wanted within the season. Like I said, aside from that one small little flaw, this is a near-perfect season, and a damn good way to close out the show. And for all those reasons and more, I am absolutely going to give Season 5 of You're the Worst overall in A. Such a fantastic show. That one that I will deeply miss for sure. I mean, just the finale alone, there were so many scenes that I was replaying and things like that. But either way, guys, that's it for my review of this final season. Let me know what you guys thought of the season overall. Left your thoughts in it. What do you think of the series as a whole? Please, if you have not checked out the show, it is of the highest recommendation. I really do wish this show got more love throughout the years. I think this is really one of those shows that sadly just fell through the cracks, but hopefully it's able to gain a following one day. Cash, I definitely definitely want to see in a lot more. I am so happy she's going to be on that Fosse Verdon show, because I do think she is a star, and I'm definitely going to be keeping a lookout on her for sure. All the other cast members are also extraordinary, but like I said, that's the one I have my eye on in terms of talent for sure. But either way, guys, that's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you to everyone that has watched my reviews of the show throughout the years. Again, I know this isn't a highly acclaimed show or anything like that. I know it doesn't have a lot of viewership, but the ones that love it really do love it, and I can't thank you guys enough for sticking around. But that's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoy. We'll see you guys in my next video, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.